Hello everyone and welcome back to another nuclear option guide. I had a request to do some guides along the lines of my aircraft guide but for the sea and ground units, and so that's where we are today. We're going to kick off with the sea units. So these are all AI controlled, but they are very important to understand. You'll be taking off from a lot of these and you'll very much be fighting a lot of these. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses, so let's jump into it. So I'm going to do these in order of increasing size, which means first off we have the one that you're probably not going to see too much, that is the OTB-31 landing craft. This is a unit that can spawn from Annex class carriers in order to ferry troops from the carrier to the land. It needs to be set up in the mission editor, so it's not something that really appears that much in dynamic games. It's also by far the smallest ship. It's only 26 meters long, so it's a tiny little target. And in terms of threat level, it really isn't much of a threat. It has a single IR SAM turret, so it can give you a little bit of a surprise if you get too close. Otherwise, it's just got a rifle caliber machine gun. This thing is very much a target for you to hunt in order to stop units spawning, rather than a real threat unless you do something really stupid. In terms of its real-life equivalent, it is heavily based on the United States landing craft air cushions hovercraft. It's an incredibly close match for that. It just has a fed over deck, and I believe that is largely just so they don't need to worry about rendering what it's technically holding. Next up then, we've got a ship that you will definitely be seeing a lot of. That is the Shard-class Corvette. This is a major anti-air warship, and there tends to be a lot of them even on maps that aren't really being very naval focused, so you're probably going to come across a lot of these in your time on nuclear option. Visibly, it's very much based on the Visby class Swedish corvettes. Those are focused on anti-submarine duties. There are no submarines in nuclear option right now, and so this is very much an air-to-air platform. And it can be quite a potent one. It has 40 RAM 45 missiles. These are the same Fox 1 missiles that are launched by the Bolt Strike SAM system. These can hit out to 20 kilometers, so they're a real threat. And then on top of that, there is a bow-mounted 57mm dual-purpose gun, which will really hurt any aircraft that it manages to hit. And very importantly, there is an aft-mounted 20mm Sea Whiz, which is great at shooting down incoming missiles. Now this does have a helipad on the back, but you cannot spawn from here. You also can't return an aircraft to storage from here. What you can do is land on the back in order to rearm and refuel. Now the big question is, how do you take this thing on? There are all sorts of different approaches. A general good approach is a saturation strike. The Sea Whiz is really good, but there are only so many missiles it can shoot down, and so if you flatten this thing with a whole load of guided missiles, particularly if you take a bunch of AGM-48s or a bunch of laser rockets, you can overwhelm this thing, then hit it with a few heavy weapons to actually finish the thing. The anti-ship missiles also do a fairly good job as they pop up at the last moment, giving it limited time to shoot them down, but you can't rely on a single missile getting a kill. The big question then is, how do you get within range? Ideally, if this thing is close to the shore, you can terrain mask to get within your missile range. If not, go very, very low. I've seen different figures of how low this thing's radar can work. Some say under 20 meters should be safe. Others say down to 5 meters above sea level is where you want to be. And either way, on your terminal approach, you will be optically spotted and the guns will fire at you even if the missiles are not, so do be careful of that. Generally best to approach this from the rear, where you've only got that 20mm gun to deal with. Definitely you don't want to approach it from the side, otherwise you will be shot by both. The complete opposite tactic is to use jamming. The Medusa or the new Alcyon, they both can equip jammer pods, and because this thing only has Fox 1s, you can jam this really quite well. Combine that with some kind of precision strike, whether that is an ARAD missile or someone else coming along with some other guided missile. You can launch your weapons at this from a good distance and then just jam the thing as those missiles are making their final approach, so it can't fire back at them. Now, they will still try to optically track and optically fire at those missiles, so it's not a guaranteed kill, so again, maybe you let off a few missiles, but it is certainly possible to kill this thing with a single ARAD and correct jamming. Next up then, we have a bit of a weird one. That is the Cursor Class LFD, or Littoral Flight Deck. This is a weird mini carrier in most respects. You can spawn a vortex or a chicane from it. It technically has a tiny little runway, so short takeoff and landing, things like the vortex can use it, and mostly it is a mini carrier. Definitely is not the most well defended ship. It does have the Ram 45 Fox 1 missiles. Doesn't have a huge amount, but it has some. Has a pair of Sea-Wiz and a laser for close defense. This is certainly something that you can just take on with sheer number of munitions, and because of its kind of general lack of anti-aircraft weaponry, you can get quite close to this thing. And so let off a bunch of AGMs or a bunch of laser-guided rockets and just overwhelm the defences. The main threat this thing poses is the fact that both vortexes and chicanes can be launched from it, and so this is something you're going to need to target, and generally it's not going to be operating on its own. It will have some escort around, which you may have to deal with first. All in all, it's a cute little ship. It's also the only catamaran in the game right now, and so that's quite a cute little feature. Next up then, we have the Argus class frigate, and this is pretty much a Shard class corvette on steroids. Visibly it seems to be based on the Australian Navy's Hunter class frigate, but in terms of what makes it special, it is mostly its ability to fire NL-98 Fox 3 missiles. These are really bloody nasty missiles, mostly because, being active radar homing missiles, they don't need the Argus class frigate to be able to lock anything in order to fire. The frigate can fire on anything that its side has data link on, and the missiles will self-track, meaning that jamming this frigate doesn't disable it. On top of that, it does have 2 IR missile turrets. It has 3 Sea-Wiz guns around it, along with air-to-ground missiles and a large 127mm cannon. And between the Sea-Wiz and the fact you can't jam this thing, it is incredibly hard to actually take one of these out. Now, absolute gung-ho saturation attacks do work with this, particularly if you've got a dark reach. You can just let off a outstanding number of bombs, and there are only so many that one Argus class frigate is going to take down. However, if this thing is in a combined fleet, then an entire dark reach's worth of glide bombs are not guaranteed to get through. A more reliable tactic is using either the Medusa or the Alkalon to jam this thing's missiles. So although the missiles can still fire, these Fox 3 missiles can be locked and jamming can be applied to them, in which case they will very quickly lose lock. You only need a few seconds of jamming, you don't need to constantly jam, eventually they'll just kind of lose where they needed to be. And so you can go in, fire off some long-range weapons, and then jam its self-defense missiles as they come up. The downside is, it's just going to fire more. It has 80 of those missiles, it has ammunition for days, and so it's quite a demanding task. You've got to constantly relock the missiles, jam the missiles as new ones come off, change target, re-jam, but it is certainly possible to do. Equally, if you can figure out a way to terrain mask around islands and get close, then letting off a massive volley of AGMs is a good bet at taking one of these things down. But these are definitely hard targets. You're going to need multiple players all working together in order to really deal with this thing. Now, one final note, this thing's helipad on the back of it is actually a spawn location. You can only take off the chicane from the hangar, but it can be really quite useful. Equally, you can land and store a chicane in the back of one of these. Next we have the largest non-carrier ship, that is the Dynamo class destroyer. Now in terms of this thing being an air-to-air threat, I'd say it's less of a danger than the Argus class frigate. It does come with the Stratolance R9s, which are incredibly long-range missiles at 50 kilometers range, so these things can really dominate in airspace, but they are just Fox 1s, so this thing is very vulnerable to being jammed. Now if you get in close to this thing, you are at serious risk. It has a pair of medium Fox 2 launchers and 4 30mm Seawiz, which will just eat anything that come within range. Mostly though, the purpose of this thing is a major support ship and anti-ship ship. This thing has a really nasty 155mm railgun, which it can essentially fire for the entire match continuously without running out, and has a bunch of anti-ship missiles. So if this thing gets within range of ground targets or within range of another fleet, it will unleash all hell. However, staying safe from it is pretty straightforward. You can notch those Stratolance missiles, you'll know as soon as they're launched because they're Fox 1s, and so notching this just on approach is a perfectly valid tactic. On the other hand, killing it is quite hard. It has an amazing radar, only beaten by the Medusa's AWACS style radar, so this thing gives awesome all-round views for its entire team, and then on top of that, it can detect you coming in even if you're in a super stealthy aircraft. Even the most stealthy aircraft get detected just over 20 kilometers here. Honestly, your best bet for defeating this thing is with jamming. Ideally using teamwork. One player can jam while the other goes in, but you can self-jam if you're using either the Medusa or especially if you're using the Ankelon. With jamming you can get really quite close to this before coming in range of its optically guided weapons, and things like the Seawiz don't work as well if the ship is being jammed. So you can certainly do standoff attacks with things like ARAD missiles. ARAD missiles generally won't kill this, but they will disable its radar with one good hit, and then it becomes very vulnerable after that. The other option is pure saturation attacks. In particular, a Dark Reach just carrying a full load of 16 Tusco Bs will wipe this thing off the earth. Equally, if you can get close to it with another aircraft such as a Brawler, which is a challenge, but you can do with things like trying to shoot down its missiles as they're launched, or if a friend is jamming it, then you can just let loose a horrendous number of AGMs, or even better, let loose some bombs if you can get close enough and just wipe this thing out. And you do want to be wiping this out if you can, mostly because of its strategic ability of being an excellent radar ship and a source of those right pain in the arse Stratolance missiles. Taking it out is really going to help your entire team. In terms of its real life equivalent, it bears a strong similarity to the Zumwalt class American missile destroyer, just not quite as smooth lines and with guns instead of just having missiles there. So now we're on to the absolute big boys, the carriers, and first up we have the Annex class carrier. This is kind of a hybrid of an amphibious assault support ship and a carrier. It's not quite a perfect real-life equivalent, but with its twin towers it does bear a sharp resemblance to the Queen Elizabeth class British carriers. On the other hand, its ability to spit out landing ships is a lot closer to the American Wasp class assault ships. But the main purpose of this is to act as a forward spawn. It does have a major limiting factor in that the runway is relatively short and doesn't have any arresting wires, which means that in order to land and ideally take off from this, you're going to need to have an aircraft capable of STOL or vertical takeoff. So you can take off your helicopters from this, including the Tarantula is available to spawn on this. Also the Cricket, the Vortex and the Medusa can be spawned from this. A nice little feature of spawning in this one is very often you will spawn in the aircraft elevators, and so you spawn and then you move up to the be flush with the deck, which is really quite fun. In terms of long-range threat, this thing does have a single RAM 45 Fox 1 missile launcher, so if you get a little bit too close, this thing can absolutely engage you. For the most part, though, it's not too much of a threat until you do start to get really close, sort of within 10 kilometers. But then it can be rather nasty. It does have another pair of infrared missiles, and nastily, its CIWS systems are 40mm cannons, which is frankly overkill for a CIWS system, and it will eat alive any aircraft that gets within range. On top of that, it does have a 76mm guided shell cannon, and the issue there is slow-moving aircraft, and especially helicopters that get within about 18 kilometers can absolutely be sniped by this bloody thing. And a bit awkwardly, because of the positioning of this and the nice big flat deck, a lot of those guns have almost 360-degree views. There's not really a weak angle that you can approach this thing from. Once again, in terms of how to hit this, a really good bet is jamming. If you can jam this thing down, you make the CIWS a lot less effective, and you take out its ability to fire its Fox 1 weapons. Alternatively, another tactic is just to approach from absolute on the deck, low level as fast as possible, and then pop up and fling bombs at this thing, again overwhelming the defences. All in all though, perhaps the best tool against this is a Dark Reach. You can just saturate strike the hell out of this thing. A bunch of Tusco Bs will just force their way through, especially considering there's only 2 CIWS systems, especially if you can launch these either from the front or the rear. That way only one CIWS system can really interact. Or alternatively, if you've taken out the enemy long-range SAM systems, you can just fire a bunch of pile drivers at this thing and they'll get through. And lastly, we have the biggest one, the Hyperion class carrier. This carrier features both a ski jump on the bow as well as arrestor hooks. It's apparently mostly based on the Indian Vikrant class carrier, but with that ski jump it also bears a resemblance to Russian designed carriers. Now this you can use with non-STOL aircraft. Things like the Ifrit can quite happily take off and land at this carrier, and the Ifrit and the Compass can both make use of those arresting hooks so they can come in nice and fast and still slow down in time. Aircraft without arresting hooks, you're best lining up with the ski ramp, and then it acts as a sort of pseudo barrier to help slow you down. Now notably, unlike the Annex, you can't take the Tarantula off from this aircraft. It's got no hangars big enough to lift that thing out. But otherwise generally serves very much the same as this kind of forward spawn point. In terms of its defences, it again just has a single RAM 45 battery. So these are the Fox 1 missiles, about 15-20 kilometer range. The sources seem to disagree. And then at shorter range, it has a medium IR missile and a pair of 20mm CIWS guns. Really, taking it on is very similar to taking on an Annex class carrier. Best bet is to jam its missiles, that way you can either get close to deliver a large number of warheads, or you can send enough missiles at long range to take it out. And again, failing anything else, then if you take out any long-range air defences near it, then your pile drivers will get through and take this thing out, or just absolute saturation attacks with Dark Reaches will overwhelm this thing's defences. Again, because of the layout and the flat deck, there's no perfect approach angle here. If you approach slightly to the about 1230 angle, you can technically get between the 2 CIWS guns and only have to deal with medium missiles, but that is then straight where those missiles are coming from. But still, that's a good angle if you're wanting to try to overwhelm it, but it is a very narrow little threshold there that you can just about sneak through. Mostly though, when attacking this thing, expect the CIWS to be active and just go for enough missiles to get through that CIWS system. And that is that. Those are all of the naval assets in place at time of recording. But as this is an early access game, this is very much being worked on. This video will become redundant as things go on. I will replace it with another video down the line when more is fleshed out. In particular, right now, a bunch of these have been flagged for the BDF faction. Only a couple have been flagged for the PLA, and so it's a pretty safe bet we're going to be seeing a lot more Pala ships coming forward in the future. In particular, these seem to be focused mostly on non-stole designs, and so looking forward to seeing what we get, what new threats we need to overcome. Otherwise, if you found this video useful, please do consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe. It all really does help promote the video in the algorithm and get this video to more people. If you have any requests for a future video, please do leave them down below. I am planning on doing a ground unit guide and very likely a munition guide. The munition guide's probably going to be a bit long because there are lots of them, but I think that's worth covering as well. If you've missed any of my previous guides, I'll be including links to those at the end there. And as always, until next time, remember to be kind to yourselves and everyone else. Cheers.